All right, guys, welcome back to the Buck Hemi Truck. Is back in the shop.
Woo!
Mike will be riding soon, I think.
I hope so.
Yeah. So just to recap where we left off, the engine and transmission is in the vehicle. The engine is mounted using Bouchelon Performance engine mounts, and the transmission is sitting on top of the rear cross member. We are using the 5.7 liter out of a 2006 Jeep Commander and a 545 RFE transmission that came out of the same Jeep. So it was a full powertrain, two-wheel drive, as it came out of the Jeep Commander. So what we're going to do today is we're going to set the transmission mount by making sure it has correct pinion angle, fabbing up a bracket to hold the tail end of the transmission up so it's nice and secure. And then we're going to start really cleaning up in here and getting rid of some of the auxiliary items, such as the old cruise control. We've already taken the old ECM out for the the 88 ECM. It was throttle body injection, and a couple other items in here we don't need. You can still see the ignition coil sitting on the firewall there. Really just getting it up and clean so we can move forward. Once the transmission is mounted in place, we'll be able to take measurements for the drive shaft. So we now need a telescoping drive shaft, and that is because the output shaft on the 545 RFE is a fixed flange. It's not a slip yoke. It doesn't slide in and out with the compression of the suspension. So we'll be covering all of that in today's episode, what we're going after.
Let's do it.
Okay, so what we're doing now is we're using a magnetic angle finder to determine how much we need to raise or lower the tail end of the transmission so that our pinion angle is correct for the entire drive line. So to do this, the vehicle needs to be sitting on all of its wheels with suspension fully compressed as it would be when you're driving down the road. You don't want to do this up in the air on a two-post because your suspension is going to be decompressed. Your angles will be off. So the way we're going to do this is take the angle finder. We're going to go to the output flange of the transmission. We're going to see what angle it's actually pitched at. So the engine and transmission is kind of at a downward slope, higher in the front of the vehicle, and it goes down towards the rear. Where the pinion, or the ring and pinion gear set in the differential for the rear axle, is actually at a different angle. And what we're trying to accomplish is we want the rear pinion angle for the differential to be 2 degrees downward of parallel. So if you were to draw an imaginary line through the powertrain this way, an imaginary line through the rear diff, when you look at them, you should have parallel lines. We're going to take the rear axle and make it 2 degrees tilted down. That way when you throttle on the gas and the engine and the rear torques, you get perfect alignment parallel with the two assemblies. So that's what we're after. Well, no, the differential is pretty much fixed, right? In the rear of the car.
Okay.
The differential is fixed. So what we have to do is some math. We have to figure out how much does the tail end of the transmission need to be pitched such that it aligns where the differential is 2 degrees down.
Okay. So we're still making sure that the differential is going to be 2 degrees down, but we're doing it at the transmission.
We're doing it at the transmission side because we don't really want to mess with the rear suspension right now. We don't want to have to put shims or pie wedges, degree shims to turn that.
Yeah.
So that's what we're actually doing is we're going to put this on the tail of the transmission, and we'll do some quick geometry to figure out how high the transmission needs to be mounted on that transmission cross brace. Now, just for full transparency, if you were to buy like the Holley engine mount and transmission mount kit, that's all figured in, so you don't have to do this.
Interesting.
But since this is a Buck truck, we are going to simply make our own
Budget build. Show you guys how to do
quite a few $100s. If you're not confident in this, just buy the kit. That's fine. But we know it's pretty simple. Just to find angles, just simple geometry.
DIY. That's what we're here for. That's what we're doing. That's what that's what we want the community to be. So.
Okay. So just as we were talking about, this is the output shaft of the 545 RFE that actually has a flange instead of a sliding yoke or a slip yoke. And what we're doing is just placing this across the flat surface, and we're going to get a read on, get it flat, there we go. We're going to get a read on the angle position, and then what we're going to do is go down to the pinion gear on the rear differential and figure out what that is.
Awesome.
All right, Mike, so what do we look like over here?
Let's see.
So, all right, so it's 4 degrees off from parallel?
From parallel.
Okay, perfect. So you'll see right here, this is pretty unique on the 545 two-wheel drive. These are the original bolts and mounts for the old 727 or 46RH that used to be in here. And it's actually pretty doggone close. It's within an inch of the mounting pad on the 545. So we're pretty darn close. Once we get these angles figured out and have the tail of the transmission raised or lowered as it needs to be, we're going to be able to cut and just weld this a little bracket on this cross member and bolt everything together.
All right. So now we measure the other side.
Now we go to the pinion. Let's see what kind of an angle we're dealing with.
Let's roll.
3 degrees above 90. Or below, like
it's on the same side as what the other side was, basically.
Okay, cool. So at least we know what we're dealing with. We're going to go to the dry erase board and do some geometry. All right, so just to recap what we're doing with the Driveline angle, in case the earlier section of the video is a little confusing, we're going to cover this now with more of like a drawn out illustration. So what we did is we went to the output flange of the transmission and put our angle finder. With our angle finder, we found it was tilted down on the horizontal. So from the horizontal line, think of that as even with the floor or level with the floor. It was tilted down around 4 degrees down. It's, you know, the notches are very, very tiny, so it's kind of hard to see exactly what it is, but it's around 4.5 degrees downward. On the differential, we did the same thing. We put the angle finder on the pinion gear yoke, and we saw that it was tilted upward around 3 degrees. So under a torque, under loading, what happens is you get axle wrap up in most cases, especially with older leaf spring vehicles. And they say about, you know, rule of thumb is about 1 degree to 2 degrees of axle wrap up of the actual twisting of the differential spinning upwards. So the leaf springs kind of flex and the differential kicks up under load. So the whole name of the game is to reduce vibrations or to minimize vibrations. We want the center line of the engine and transmission combination equivalent or parallel with the center line of the rear differential under load. So when you're really on the power, to reduce vibrations and have the least stress on your drive line, you want these two center lines in parallel. So what we've done is we've taken the measurements and said, okay, we know we're down 4.5. We can do a direct comparison just by using, you know, your simple geometry of equal and opposite angles. We'll know that this angle here from horizontal up is also 4.5 degrees going upwards. Okay, so we're at 3.0 here, 4.5 there. Our difference, should this increase another, say 1 degree to 2 degrees, is going to be somewhere between 4 and 5 degrees. So your center line changes of the rear axle going up now 4.0 to 5.0. Okay, so if you look, we're pretty doggone close. We're kind of right in that ballpark right there. So for our sakes, to minimize a whole bunch of headache and fabrication, what we're going to do is we're just going to pretty much mount it as it is in place right now, because the numbers are pretty much lining up. If you want to go further and really perfect it out, you can notch out the bottom of the trans cross member deeper, bring that tail end down to achieve that 2 degree angle difference. For us, it's not really worth the additional headache and heartburn that's going to come from that. So we're just going to pretty much mount it as is, make sure we have clearance around it with no metal hitting, and rock out with it. So what we've done is we've just put our floor jack under the tail of the transmission housing, and we have raised it to meet our 5.5 degree angle from horizontal. So this is set where it needs to go. I'll go ahead and get the camera from you, Mike.
Yeah.
There we are. So that's about 5.5 right there. All right. That is set. You can see now where we are on the transmission side. We have a clearance now. That is pretty tight. We're going to actually measure from the bottom of the transmission case to this lip right here on the cross member. And we'll wind up cutting this cross member so that we can put a rubber isolator, like a rubber mount to reduce vibrations. But it's pretty straightforward. All we have to do is lift the vehicle up after we take this measurement, and we can do everything else up in the air. Show you where we are currently with the low Buck Hemi truck. So first we're going to start with the drive shaft. We have the drive shaft back from the shop, and it is all nice. They were able to take our original drive shaft, put a new front flange on it in replacement of the old slip yoke that went into the original trans. And here at the end, they cut the drive shaft, put on a slip joint. So that's actually a spline shaft into this yoke with a reducing universal joint here to fit the original D150 rear end. Now you saw earlier how we took the measurements to make this drive shaft happen. What you probably didn't see is how much it wound up costing us. So this drive shaft was how much, Mike?
I want to say what, like $650 total?
Well, it was somewhere in that $650 range. It was very expensive. We do have the receipts. We'll have to dig that up, but it was a lot more than I was expecting. Usually this stuff is like $250 back in the day, 5-10 years ago. But
right.
This that blew me away. That much for a drive shaft modification, but it's done. So
it's done.
The drive shaft is in place. It's balanced.
This is our old
that's
drive
it.
shaft
That's
that they basically modified for us. Kept the front side basically and changed this back side to
right.
Basically took they took the one from our D150, right? This is
our
D150.
This is the yes, this is the D150 drive shaft.
Yeah.
So on this end, it's factory up to the universal joint.
Yeah.
That's a new universal joint and a flange put on instead of the original slip joint, slip yoke, right? So this is all original.
Yep.
This flange is new and the universal joint is new. On this end, they literally cut the drive shaft and welded on. This is a spline section here.
Mm-hmm.
And then this slip yoke right here, this slip joint, rides on the splines and has the universal joints to go into the rear end.
Yeah.
So this is new and this is new.
Yeah. So this it allows for some travel with your suspension and everything.
Right.
So it actually, we gave him the dimensions and he kind of hit it midway and allowed us to travel both ways of it. So.
Yeah, so you no longer have the slip in the rear of the transmission with this 545 RFE. Some of the trucks do still have a slip yoke, so you won't have to do this modification. Ours being a Jeep Jeep 545, we did have to do this modification. So because you don't have any slipping here, which accounts for suspension travel, you have to have a modified drive shaft that accounts for suspension travel.
Yep, and also check out the mount that we did for the transmission.
That was pretty.
Remember, what we had to get it at the right height, right, Blake?
That's right.
What we were measuring.
So we were measuring the driveline angle of the rear of the transmission. We did all that to calculate our right angles and lengths for the drive shaft. So what we were able to do is calculate based on the standard rear end that the tail of the transmission needed to be dropped an inch lower from this factory cross member. This is a factory cross member. So what we did was we cut the factory cross member right here out. We took that section of material out, we dropped it and spun it around, believe it or not, and then welded in a 1-inch spacer right here. So we spaced this entire bottom down 1 inch, which is what you see here, and bolted it in using a GM, like an old 700R4 GM transmission mount. Very universal. It worked well with this modification we had to do.
Yep. We're going to put a link down for you guys to find that, but we picked it up at O'Reilly's. You can probably find it on Amazon and all that.
Very easy. It's
Yep.
Not a bad fab.
You know, it's got a you know, poly bushing.
Well, that's actually natural rubber. That's not polyurethane.
Okay.
So we wanted to match the natural rubber of the forward motor mounts, the engine mounts. So you don't want different dampening. You don't want very firm mount in the back and, you know, loose natural rubber mounts in the front. So we matched. Everything is matching. This is the original Y pipe for the exhaust out of the Jeep Grand. Oh, sorry, Jeep Commander, not Jeep Grand Cherokee.
Good, man. Yeah, so we're getting it together, guys, and we're getting close. We're getting close. We're doing engine work, getting the engine wired up. But yep, that is for the drive shaft and the transmission mount. That's what you need to know right there. So hopefully you guys can find a good drive shaft company to make you a custom one, and hopefully not take too much advantage of you. But it's 2022 right now, and folks are very proud of their work. Alright guys, catch up with you later.